Okay.
Recording in progress.
Your Excellency, Madam President, Ambassador Professor Ischinger, ladies and gentlemen, dear members and friends of the German Council on Foreign Relations. It is relatively rare, even for DGAP, which is the oldest think tank, of course, in Germany, to receive a president, a real president, at our location. We're therefore more than happy that you, Madam President of the Republic of Kosovo, will talk to us today. In doing so, you honor our institution and us all very much. We're equally happy that the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger, joins us today as a commentator. Welcome to both of you, and thank you very much for the privilege to host you today. Dr. Vjosa Osmani-SADRIU was elected President of the Republic of the Kosovo Parliament in April 2022. Her prestigious previous postings included President of the Parliament of the Republic of Kosovo. President Osmani-SADRIU is a US-educated lawyer, having gotten her PhD from the University of Pittsburgh. She has been very involved in Kosovo state-building efforts right from the start. She represented her government before the International Court of Justice on Kosovo's Declaration of Independence, which the court upheld. In 2021, she was elected on a reformist and anti-corruption platform. She's also a role model for many women in her country. Ambassador Professor Wolfgang Ischinger has an extraordinary career of a diplomat in the German Foreign Service behind him, which included posting as Secretary of State as well as Ambassador to Washington and London. Since 2008, he is chairman of the Munich Security Conference. His interest in Kosovo is not only of a policy nature. He also harbors very good feelings and empathy vis-à-vis the people of Kosovo since the days he was involved in NATO's air campaign in 1999 and his task as a mediator in the conflict with Serbia. He holds a doctoral degree from the University of Pristina. And also, of course, he's a member of our board. We're also very grateful to our specialist of the region, Milan Nič, who has graciously agreed to host and moderate today's debate. There is no shortage of interesting issues on the table. On the domestic front, we would be very interested to know how President Osmani wants to advance market reform and how she intends to tackle corruption. On the international side, we would want to know which next steps are intended to further the integration of Kosovo into international institutions. We would also like to explore how Kosovo wants to relate to its neighbors, deal with the pandemic, and energize relations with the EU and Germany. I'm looking forward to what promises to be an exciting debate about the situation in and around Kosovo. I'm sure that all our spectators will benefit very much from the discussion. We have agreed that President Osmani will give a formal speech of about 10 minutes. Ambassador Ischinger will then comment for about 5 minutes. And then Milan Nič will guide the discussion on the podium and with our members. He will explain the ground rules of the debate after the formal speeches. I now have the privilege to hand it over to you, Madam President. The floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Dear friends from DGAP, dear Ambassador Ischinger, such a great pleasure to meet you again. We've had the luck of working together through so many processes, so always a pleasure to be together with those who have stood by us for such a long time. It's also great to see other friends and people that we've worked with throughout the 2 decades to make sure that Kosovo's voice is heard in the world. And this, of course, is a remaining struggle. As you know, it's been 13 years and more that Kosovo has declared independence. And while so many new chapters of development and moving forward have been opened, there's still a bumpy road ahead. There are still so many challenges that we need to deal with, both domestically as well as internationally. But let me first talk about how the new institutions of Kosovo are planning to tackle all of these challenges. As you know, on the 14th of February elections, our agenda focused on jobs and justice won an overwhelming majority. There's a new generation of politicians in Kosovo right now, both in the government, in the parliament, as well as in the presidency, which I have the honor to lead, that is very much focused on dealing with the most acute problems of the citizens of Kosovo, many of which, especially in the area of health and education, had been left aside for so many years, because we so fiercely believe that the only way to move our country forward is if we invest in our human capital, if we invest in our people. As a country with the youngest population in Europe, that is our biggest treasure, and that's exactly where we should invest. And especially if we turn both our attention as well as our budget, that means our investment in education and health, that means that we're also contributing long-term to our economic development. For that reason, of course, and because of the pandemic, our agenda and the economic recovery is very much focused on building back better. The areas of focus are investment in the health sector, in education, in green recovery, but most importantly, in our youth and women of the society. Just to go back for a minute on what happened on the 14th of February, those who made change possible were especially three categories of people: women, 62% of the voters of the platform on jobs and justice were women. Secondly, youth. And third are diaspora, most of whom live here in Germany. So they made this change possible, and now it's extremely important that their potential is unleashed and is included in our development agenda. Right now, so what we found actually in the institutions is that around the unemployment among youth is around 50%. And when we're talking about inactivity rate among women is at 80%, not just the largest in the Balkans, but one of the largest in the world. So I'm personally very much committed to making sure that beyond just my capacity as president of Kosovo, that is mostly focused according to the constitution in foreign policy and defense policy, that I put the issue of economic empowerment of women at the top of my agenda, along with green recovery and other issues that deal with helping the most vulnerable, especially now post-pandemic. Of course, rule of law is the centerpiece of everything that we do. Strongly believe that success in any other area is impossible unless we are successful in our rule of law efforts. For that reason, the reforms that have started from the current institutions of Kosovo are happening at a record pace, and the cornerstone of our reforms in the justice sector on one hand and the security sector on the other hand is the vetting process. Obviously, we want to learn from examples in the region and elsewhere, also learn from their mistakes and what went wrong when it comes to vetting in other countries, but we absolutely think it's indispensable, because I think that as a country we will prove not just to our citizens, but also we will prove to the rest of the world who came at our rescue that we are standing on our own feet at the day where citizens of Kosovo truly believe that even if the public institutions are violating their rights, they have a place where they can complain and there will be justice there. At the moment where the level of trust in the police, in the prosecutor's office, in the justice sector in general is extremely high, and that's the place where the rights of our citizens are ultimately protected. When it comes to, of course, this reform agenda, we do understand that it's extremely challenging and things will not happen overnight, especially if we want to do them right. And for that reason, we are working closely with our European and US partners, primarily with Germany when it comes to the European Union, but also countries outside of the EU, like the UK, to make sure that our rule of law agenda moves forward. From vetting to issues related to gender equality, tackling domestic violence and others, every single step forward is also done with the support of our partners. It is extremely important that Kosovo has moved ahead from a period of dependency on decision-making from international partners to a period of in what the Americans are calling the journey of self-reliance, in terms of making decisions, having the courage as well as the political will of making these reforms, but at the same time we have all of these partners at our side, helping either financially or with expertise, but the decision is finally taken by all of the Kosovo institutions. Let me now jump to the issue of regional cooperation. As you know, it's one of the main topics nowadays. As Kosovo, we have always cherished the initiative from Berlin many years ago, as you know, known as the Berlin process. And I think that that process has brought countries of the region closer. It has resulted with so many agreements that have really made the lives of our citizens better. The problem was that there were countries that did not implement some of these agreements, and no surprise, I'm talking here mainly about Serbia. Whether we're talking about the 2018 agreement signed in London within the auspices of the Berlin process on the missing persons, where Serbia did not undertake any step when it comes to showing the location of massive graves, where they did not open the archives, where all of the information about the missing persons from Kosovo is located, to any other action, or other kinds of implementation of agreements with relation to removing trade barriers and so on and so forth. Serbia remains the country that not only destabilizes the region, but it remains the country that does not comply with what they sign. And as a diplomat once said, with Serbia, you always had two types of negotiations. One is to convince them to sign, and the other one is to convince them to implement. And rather times, the second is much more difficult than the first. So that's what we're struggling with as a region. But we strongly believe that the Berlin process is the only solution towards making sure that the countries really reach closer to the European Union. It has never intended to replace the EU integration process. However, to reach more interconnectivity, digitalization, remove trade barriers, deal with issues like bringing youth together in our region through the RICO agreement, to the issue of the missing persons, which is the deepest wound from the wars in former Yugoslavia that were waged by Serbia. When it comes to the Open Balkan Initiative, we believe that it's not only a dangerous initiative, but at the same time it is aimed at really delaying the European integration process of the countries in the region. We strongly believe that whether from a security point of view, from a political and economic point of view, as well as from an EU integration point of view, this is absolutely the wrong thing to do for the region, which is why Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, as well as Montenegro have rejected this initiative from the very beginning. And at the same time, the initiative, if I may call it so, because we don't really even know what it is, since, in detail, since there's no piece of paper that has ever been delivered to the countries of the region. But at the same time, it is not inclusive. And as you know, the principle of inclusivity is the main principle, and along with equal footing of representation are the two main principles of any regional initiative. And this initiative, which was started in Novi Sad, Serbia, never intended to consider Kosovo on an equal footing with other countries of the region. And at the same time, of course, Serbia continues to deny our right to exist. Therefore, to conclude on the issue of regional cooperation, we believe that the Open Balkan Initiative is dangerous, it delays European integration, and it intends to replace the Berlin process, which is impossible, and we're not going to allow for that to happen. Whereas when it comes to the Berlin process, we think so far it has been quite productive. It needs to continue with further agreements which must be concluded and signed, and it does bring countries of the region closer to European integration, of course, by requiring them to exercise and implement necessary reforms for the EU integration process. On the dialogue with Serbia, as you know, the new institutions have a clear stance which was built not just after we were elected. Both myself as president as well as the Prime Minister of Kosovo have been holding the same stance throughout our political career. So no surprises here. Obviously, we will never accept to negotiate on Kosovo's territorial integrity. We will not change our constitution in order to create third layers of government which resemble and might lead us to Republika Srpska or another Republika Srpska in our region, which simply destabilizes everything. And of course, we will not negotiate Kosovo's status, which has been resolved once and forever with the Declaration of Independence on the 17th of February 2008 and reconfirmed by the International Court of Justice. Having said that, there are so many issues of importance which we believe should be discussed with a final agreement that is centered on mutual recognition. There's only one solution that can bring everlasting peace and stability in the Balkans, and that is Serbia to recognize the reality of a sovereign and independent Kosovo. Until that happens, Serbia will continue to be the troublemaker in the Balkans, the destabilizer in the Balkans, and the trampoline that brings forward the Russian malign influence as well as the Chinese influence in our region. So for that reason, I believe it's about time that the international community is loud and clear towards Vučić and other leaders in Serbia that they should not aim at sitting at two chairs at once. They cannot pretend to be the pro-Europeans, which they are not, and at the same time increase their political, economic, as well as military cooperation with Russia. Just to give you an example, a few months ago we had a military exercise called Defender 21 with NATO members, primarily with the United States. All countries in the region, not just the Western Balkans, but Greece and other countries participated in this military exercise. If you look at the map, there's only one dot there that is empty. Only one country that did not accept to participate in this military exercise, Defender 21, with NATO allies, and that was Serbia. And that exact same day that we were doing the military exercise with the US Army, Serbia organized their own military exercise with Russia and Belarus, showing in this way where they stand when it comes to military cooperation and sending a message, which I do hope was not ignored by our international partners. The same now with the Afghanistan crisis. Countries like Kosovo, which was the first one, Albania, North Macedonia, and others have shown NATO who its true friends are in the region. So when it comes to the dialogue, Kosovo is absolutely being the constructive party in the process. I know that there's quite a lot of efforts from biased people in Brussels and elsewhere to portray Kosovo as the one that is destructive. That is absolutely not true. The truth is this: Kosovo has accepted to be entirely committed to the process, to participate in each and every round of dialogue, despite of the fact that Serbia has never apologized for the horrendous crimes committed against our people. We have participated in every round of the dialogue, and we have made concrete proposals in every round of the dialogue. Serbia has made no proposals. Serbia has rejected every proposal, and in fact, it has focused on horrible insults during the negotiation process. For that reason, to have people trying to portray Kosovo as the destructive party is absolutely biased and shows that there are still attempts to make Kosovo look bad internationally, while the reality is that our constructiveness is shown on a daily basis with concrete proposals that would contribute to further stability in our region, including proposals when it comes to the issue of the missing persons, which we believe is absolutely urgent and should be dealt with immediately. In terms of how geopolitics in the Balkans are evolving, I did mention the unfortunate influence of Russia, and when it comes to economic influence of also China. That is, of course, again, because of Serbia, but Kosovo has shown to be, I guess, the country that has strongly rejected both of these influences in all terms, including during their vaccine diplomacy, if I may call it so. Kosovo was the only country in the region to reject the Russian and the Chinese vaccine, and has only resorted to European and American vaccines so far. But it is extremely important that both the EU and NATO understand that the only way to tackle this malign influence is to be more concrete when it comes to our region's accession to the European Union, in the case of Kosovo also joining NATO. So we do need further support from our partners so that we can be where we deserve to be, both when it comes to visa liberalization, which is a process that should have been finished by the EU so long ago because we fulfilled our criteria many years ago, and now it's up to the EU to deliver, but at the same time to support Kosovo's entry into NATO as one of the aspects that would help security in our region and would fight malign influence in all of the Western Balkans. For us, Kosovo's future lies in the European Union family. We have never looked elsewhere. We never will be looking elsewhere. We do not see this just as an option. It's absolutely the only alternative. And as the new institutions, we will do our utmost to make sure that all of these reforms are delivered and are implemented on a very timely fashion. To conclude, perhaps, just to leave a little bit time for questions, the EU, but especially Germany, on one side, and the United States of America remain Kosovo's two most strategic partners. We are very thankful for Germany, the US, and other countries for standing by us during both good and bad times. And I do hope that while we work together, we can achieve new successes and sustainable peace in the region. And this can be achieved when Kosovo is an equal member of the international community. So I appeal once again to Germany and to other friends to support Kosovo's further membership in international organizations, as well as in our efforts to strengthen statehood through new recognitions, because that would not only be Kosovo's success, it will, just like everything else we have achieved so far, a joint success of ours and our partners. Thank you for your attention.
So Ambassador Ischinger is next.
Okay. Is this on? Is it on? Okay. I think I can do this from here. Madam President, thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions for our moderator to moderate in the next, whatever we have, half hour or so. I want to just offer a little bit of perspective, and I'll be very, very brief. I don't think many people, not even within my own government here in Berlin, will recall that when I was dispatched as the German senior negotiator to a place called Dayton, Ohio, in November of 1995, my instructions included instructions from Helmut Kohl and Klaus Kinkel, then foreign minister. My instructions included, Ischinger, go and try to resolve the Kosovo problem in Dayton. And quite frankly, in the presence of President Izetbegovic, President Tudjman, and President Milosevic, I raised the issue of Kosovo, which was then not seen as such a hot potato, but it was seen by us as a potential hot potato, an unresolved problem. I raised it in the initial discussions, roundtable in Dayton, and my proposal was, of course, totally rejected. The argument being, we have so much on our hands with Bosnia-Herzegovina, almost impossible to resolve in and of itself, so let's not go into overload. I think in retrospect, we would be in a better position, you would be in a better position, the entire region would be in a better position if we had tried as early as '95 to adopt a more comprehensive approach, not only focusing on the specifics of the terrible war in Bosnia at the time. So this is just one recollection. Second, when you speak, Madam President, about the difficulties between Kosovo and Serbia, it is important for non-experts, for the German public, for the audience here, to understand that for the last 20 years or so, we've been dealing with very unequal partners. Serbia, as the whether that's legitimate or legally correct or not, let's leave that aside. But Serbia, as the de facto successor to Yugoslavia, for example, had, when we first started to discuss a future negotiated arrangement between Kosovo and Serbia, Serbia had a fully developed international legal department in their foreign ministry. And quite frankly, I hope you don't, you're not angry at me for saying that. You had nobody. In those days, of course, that's different now, but in those days, there was no one in the Kosovo delegation who could claim that he had any serious international diplomatic negotiating experience to speak about. So the situation was extremely unequal. And I know that you benefited, or your predecessors benefited enormously from advice, formal and informal advice offered especially by Americans who were dispatched or who came on their own free will to help out and advise Kosovars. And some of us tried from the European side also to help change this unequal balance a little bit at the time. Third brief remark. When we had the Troika negotiations in 2007, remember, this was a last-ditch effort before the decision to declare independence, a last-ditch effort for 6 months with a Russian representative, my friend Frank Wisner of the United States, and myself representing the European Union. I kept repeating to my friends in the Kosovo delegation, led at the time by Hashim Thaçi and others, and I will repeat that advice now, even if you find it maybe less appropriate today than it was at the time. I said, you guys, I mean, the Pristina delegation, you should always be able to point out that you are the better European. Always try to be a little bit ahead of the Serbs in terms of making us feel that it is worth fighting for your success. In other words, try to be the good guys. And that, in those days, was not a difficult proposition to make because the Serbs were clearly the bad guys. They refused to accept all useful proposals at the time. My impression is, and that is my the end of my comment, my impression is that your explanations that you just gave are going to be challenged in Brussels, but throughout the European Union, increasingly. If Kosovo continues to say that a certain agreement that was, if I remember correctly, that was agreed in 2013 or so, considering the communities, the Serbian communities, cannot be implemented, I think that makes your position quite difficult and makes it less likely for you to demonstrate that you are the good guys and the others are the less good guys. So my question to you is, and I'm sure there will be many other questions, my question to you is, if implementing such an agreement, which goes back a number of years, if implementing that is not possible on constitutional reasons, etc., which I understand, why is it not possible to think of a solution that is maybe less formal, more informal, but that would politically take away from you this excuse me, need to shut this off. Need to take away from you this burden of being seen, at least by some, as refusing to implement agreements that have been reached. That would be my question, trying to be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Ischinger. It's an honor for me to moderate then the further discussion here. Madam President, we are also running out of the allocated time, and in the interest of including you in the room, this is a hybrid event. We have audience online. We have a very knowledgeable audience here in the room. Some of you might, some of the experts on Balkans in Berlin might be familiar to you. But in the interest of that, I will cut short through my questions in the panel and then open up as we planned. So, short housekeeping rules. We will have a discussion here in the panel with both Madam President and Ambassador Ischinger. Then we will open up to you. You can also pose questions through a chat if you are following us online. And this event is planned to go until 1:30. So with this, just to start you in a different dynamics with a short question, I want to take you out of the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue. We will come back to it. But after an extraordinary year of change in Kosovo politics, I think we should start with focus on that. You mentioned snap elections of 14th of February. Vetovan dossier came to power. Opposition until that time came to power, ruling in majority in the parliament after the different generation in politics that was closely linked to the independence, to war, and then you were elected in parliament as president. Within this year, when in tandem with Albin Kurti, the prime minister, you have been in power already for half a year. What has been the toughest decision for you so far?
I wish I could answer that with only one sentence. Look, I've been in politics for the past 22 years. There were so many tough moments that my country had to deal with, and I was there in different capacities. So I think that we've passed most of the tough moments. I can say that there was a very, very tough decision. I felt really good, and that I'm representing the citizens of Kosovo in every decision that I made. So I can say that in these first 6 months that I've ever felt like something was so tough to do. In fact, I have felt really proud of every single decision that I've made. But to speak more generally, I think the biggest challenge for all of us, not just me as president, will be the rule of law reforms, because they cannot happen overnight. There will be quite a lot of rejections from many structures and substructures, and it will take a lot of courage, a lot of political will, and it will require also support from our international partners. So as a challenge, I see that, but I can say that I felt like it was tough. It was challenging. Every single day is challenging in our job, because it's not like you just put forward an idea and you implement it. Quite a lot of our time is spent on preventing bad things from happening, because there are still many efforts to derail important processes. But generally speaking, the rule of law reforms will be most challenging.
To follow up on that, before you came to this first visit to Berlin, you tried to broker a consensus deal between the government and the opposition on postponement of regarding the local elections planned for 17th of October, because due to the pandemics, an uptick of new infections with the Delta variant, and the recommendation of the hygienic authority, it might not be the best idea to hold the elections on the original date. What has happened? Please tell us, and
Yes,
what was your role in it?
We had a recommendation from our institute which deals with the management of the pandemic, and I always tend to follow the advice of the experts, especially when it comes to the health of our citizens. So I did advise political parties that they should take this into account, because our hospitals are really dealing with a difficult situation with no space in the hospitals, with beds and medical equipment. Unfortunately, the opposition parties were not ready to postpone this. So despite of the fact that the majority in the parliament is won by the parties that are now in power, for me it was extremely important for issues of democracy, such as the right to elect and be elected. We consult and we bring along the opposition. But since there was no consensus, I decided that the elections shall be held at that exact date. But now the numbers are a little bit more promising when it comes to the infections, and I want to take this opportunity once again to thank the doctors and nurses and others, frontliners, who are doing their best to make sure that the numbers are going down. So there are optimistic news, but we agreed with political parties that if we have a big surge again, in the days to come, that we're going to sit down again, and if necessary, we can decide then to postpone elections. But right now, because of the lack of the consensus between the parties in power and in opposition, we'll continue as planned for October.
I will bring you to the discussion, Ambassador Ischinger, in a second, but to stay with the pandemics, which is a joint challenge everywhere, including in this country, the way out is closely linked to vaccination. What is the current vaccination rate in Kosovo, and do you have enough vaccines, or you need help from European partners?
We do need further support, because, as you know, for some of the vaccines, we will also be needing a third dose. Right now, we're standing okay, because we just received 500,000 doses from President Biden from the United States of Pfizer vaccines. The vast majority of our population has been vaccinated with Pfizer, which means that the third dose will ultimately be Pfizer again. But in order for that to happen, we're going to need further support and donations. When it comes to the rate, according to COVAX projections, Kosovo is going to be the first country in the Western Balkans to reach 70% of the population vaccinated with both doses by the end of this year. But we're planning to achieve that even before, sometime in November, which means that numbers post-November will be above 70%, which I think is quite promising. The percentage of those rejecting the vaccination is quite low in Kosovo, and I think we should use this momentum to vaccinate as many citizens as possible, and that's why we need to have enough vaccines on stock, and I do hope that our partners will continue to support us in this regard.
So you plan to be at the vaccination rate 70% of adult population by the end of November. What is the vaccination rate at the moment?
Right now, we've reached, I believe, around 50% of the population with both doses. Over 1 million vaccines have been administered, and a lot are still awaiting their second dose, and all of those that are awaiting their second dose will be finishing by November, which is when we achieve the 70% of the population. And then in December, we have to continue so that the rate goes higher than that.
Thank you. Ambassador
I'm sorry,
Ischinger?
if I may ask, if I could answer to Ambassador Ischinger's
that,
advice on the...
You probably want to answer the question on Serbia-Kosovo dialogue.
On the issue of Association of Municipalities, specifically to
That's
explain
a very specific
our
question, and I will come back to it, I assure you.
Got it.
But to stay with the question of how Germany and how European Union and European partners can help Kosovo in the pandemics, when the US, the strategic partner of Kosovo, donates 500,000 of vaccines, do you see, what would you advise to German government hearing this?
To match? To try to match what Joe Biden just did by making this generous offer, we should be capable. We maybe not as Germany, but surely as the EU, we should be capable of coming up with the same number of doses to give to Kosovo. It's in our interest. We will be safe only once everybody is safe. That was said by the Director General of WHO a year ago, and he was right then, and he's still correct. If I may make a very modest suggestion, Madam President, you will make a huge number of new friends in Germany if you, instead of saying Pfizer, if you say Pfizer-BioNTech, because the people who developed the vaccine is actually a small German company, interestingly enough, led and run and managed by a couple that has Turkish origin. So the success story of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is also for Germany a hugely interesting story of integration, you know, of our ethnic minorities into the country, and we're really quite proud of this Pfizer-BioNTech success story.
You're absolutely right.
Shall we go to Serbia-Kosovo dialogue?
Sure.
There was a Brussels agreement in 2013, then implementation of the Brussels agreement. Then there was an American deal, or Washington agreement last year with your predecessor Hashim Thaçi and the President of Serbia, Vučić. What has actually been implemented from that Washington agreement, which was part of the election campaign of President Trump and his special envoy for the dialogue, Richard Grenell, ambassador to Germany?
When it comes to the Washington agreement, I think plenty of it has already been implemented, from issues related to opening the embassy in Jerusalem to other issues which, let's say, tackle considering Hezbollah as a terrorist organization or decriminalizing rights related to the LGBTI. And all of these actually had been already dealt by our institutions even before the Washington Agreement. The very first part of the Washington Agreement deals with economic cooperation. If you look at what they refer to, it is the exact agreements reached in the Berlin process. So it's nothing new. So simply asking both parties to implement what had been reached in terms of infrastructural cooperation, interconnectivity, and all that, which Kosovo had already signed and is ready to implement. But of course, the struggle is the finances of it. And we're working closely with the European Union and the US government, including the new US government now, to see how these projects can be implemented. There are especially two problems in that agreement. One is the foreseen moratorium on recognitions and memberships in international agreements, and second was this very vague sentence on the lake in North Kosovo, the Gazivoda Uimani Lake, because it says that there will be a feasibility study by the US institutions, by the US Department of Energy, on how the resources of the lake can be shared between Kosovo and Serbia. The lake is in the territory of Kosovo. It's within the sovereignty of Kosovo. So there was no question on the feasibility study because there was none done for decades, and we welcomed it, and it happened. But there was quite a lot of question marks on what does it mean when you say sharing with Serbia. So there were questions on whether someone's trying to push the notion of shared sovereignty and so on and so forth. So far, we've received the feasibility study, but the Kosovo institutions are absolutely committed to protecting its sovereignty all over the borderline with Serbia. So, of course, we're ready to respect all democratic standards, European standards on cross-border cooperation with all of the countries around the borders. But when it comes to the lake, it is obviously within the sovereign right of Kosovo to use the resources. When it comes to the moratorium, it has ended now, and we're working very closely with our US partners when it comes to our agenda on recognitions and international organizations' bids. Let me be very clear. I don't think we can succeed on any international organization unless we closely coordinate with our partners. In this regard, when it comes to European and regional organizations, we do see that Germany can take a leadership role. When it comes to other organizations, such as, Interpol, UNESCO, and others, we will sit down, coordinate, and work together the plan with the US and EU members. We're not just going to go ourselves, because we don't want to fail, obviously. So we're going to plan, we're going to apply when we are all ready, together with the US and our EU partners, because we want to succeed. It's not just in our interest, but also in the interest of the region to have us in these international organizations. Now, when it comes to the Brussels Agreement of 2013, look, if you look at that agreement and the other 53 pieces of papers, some agreements, some annexes, some implementation plans that have been signed in Brussels, not just that I'm saying this, according to civil society in Serbia, according to the intermediaries in Brussels as well, according to our US partners, Serbia has not implemented 2/3 of all of these agreements. 2/3. On the other side, if you look at Kosovo, Kosovo has implemented 99% of the agreements. There's only one. Only one. And I'm not talking about the 2013 agreement that was ratified in the parliament. I'm talking about a 2015, what was called intermediate document, signed at that time by Mustafa and Vučić, which was sent to the Constitutional Court, and the court decided that from the very title of that document to the very end were executive powers that would create a third layer of government not allowed in our constitution would be created with that document, are not in line with our constitution. Now, what does the 2013 agreement say? It says an association of municipalities should be formed. The point is, our law and our constitution allow for the kind of association of municipalities which would not risk Kosovo's stability in the terms of an NGO that brings municipalities together, who lobby for competences, who lobby for decentralization, who lobby for the rights of the municipalities with the national government. That is allowed in our legislation. What is not allowed is the kind of executive powers that are a prelude to another Republika Srpska, which would destabilize not just Kosovo, but the entire region. And two, what is not allowed in our constitution is to create mono-ethnic entities. As Ambassador Ischinger knows very well, please, because this is very important, and not just for those of us that are here, but for all of our European partners to understand the correct position of Kosovo. It is against European values. It is against the constitution that we have built together. It's against what our European partners have been striving to do for the past 2 decades in Kosovo, which is multi-ethnicity. I don't want to destroy what we have achieved with so much work, which is integration. Mono-ethnic institutions create segregation. Why would I ask the Serbs in Gilan to do everything separately from Albanians in Gilan when they have been going along very well? They have all of these Serb municipalities, except for the ones in the north, were part of the Kosovo Association of Municipalities, pushing forward unanimously decisions together with Albanian municipalities, Turkish municipalities, and others, where the majority is, let's say, from other communities. So what I'm trying to say is, let's work together for something that truly respects European values. Let's really reject segregation together, because mono-ethnic institutions like the one that was built in that intermediate documents of 2015 is not in the interest of Serbs living in Kosovo. They have never asked, I have never met a Serb living in Kosovo asking for the association of municipalities. Vučić does, because for him, it all comes down to territorial claims. Because the prelude is, let's make this chain of Serb municipalities, and then let's ask them to do what Republika Srpska with Dodik is continuously doing, try to gain independence so that they can become part of the greater Serbia idea that stems from the Milosevic times. And I think we should jointly reject these kind of ideas. Final word. Final. But it is an extremely important topic that I think everyone should understand from the core. The ambassador knows the Bosnia problem very well.
If you go back in history and look at how it all started, it started with what we call Zajednica. That was what existed before the current Republika Srpska. That is exactly what was proposed in the 2015 agreement, which is the only agreement, I repeat, out of 53, only one. So how can we be the bad guys? How can the party that implemented 99% be the bad guy versus the party who implemented only about 30% of the agreements? I ask you to jointly fight this kind of logic. We are protecting not just our interest by not creating another Republika Srpska. We are protecting the entire region. And we are also working to make sure that our partners don't have to invest only on stabilocracies for the next 30 years, but actually start together with us also investing in democracies, multi-ethnicity, which is what we worked on before, of course, and after independence.
It's very hard to interrupt the president and so knowledgeable and enthusiastic one. But Ambassador Ischinger, if I may ask you to, let's step back from details. There are many important details, but this is not a negotiation discussion about Serbia and Kosovo negotiations. What are you observing about the new government and president who came to responsibility for the dialogue with Serbia, for normalization, for the first time with a brief interlude for Albin Kurti? They are having a responsibility for moving forward. There is a notion out there that they are now a little bit backsliding to the promises that they gave in your own statement in the parliament when you were elected, or in the government declaration, because you're buying out time. And it seems to me that Serbia has more time. It is in the interest of Kosovo to move faster because there are many other issues around Europe. Coming back to your advice, what's your impression? Is this the rhetoric is a starter, and the tandem, if I may say so, President Osmani and Prime Minister Albin Kurti also brought the issues of the past into the dialogue, at least in the rhetoric. Do you see a strategy behind that?
Well, first of all, let me try to offer a philosophical remark. Time is a very important tool of diplomacy. It is possible that a certain objective cannot be reached at this time. I think that is what you have determined, or the government, Albin Kurti and his government. It is possible that next year, or in 6 months, or in 2 years, the objectives may appear to be closer at hand, right? So the point I want to make is, in international diplomacy, there is no such thing as mathematical, categorical impossibility. Everything is possible. We Germans know that because we had a problem that was probably of an even bigger strategic nature when the two German states were divided. And we managed, miraculously, to overcome this division and reunite. There are many lessons to be drawn from that. And one is to figure out the correct timing. So I have an understanding for the president and for the current government in Pristina. A lot has happened in Pristina recently. The former president, her predecessor, is being investigated, or I don't know what the exact legal term is, in The Hague. I mean, this is a political convulsion. This is not easy for a young country that has been under so much threat and pressure. So I understand that you need to reevaluate your own priorities. I think that it is good that the Albin Kurti government has announced that it will make fighting corruption a first priority, etc. But having said all this and having expressed my understanding for the difficulties, I do think that Kosovo would be making a tactical and maybe even a strategic mistake if you allowed the impression to be created that you believe that you will benefit from simply stalling. Because the Serbs, and I think you're right, believe they have even more time than you. And they believe they need the agreement with you, a solution with you, less than you do. Whether that's a correct assumption, let's leave that aside. So, again, you ask, what would I say if I were an advisor to the Kosovo leadership? I would say, try to come up with a few, initiatives that demonstrate your urgent interest to get back into a negotiating process, to make the life of Miroslav Lajčák, to put it into concrete terms, to make the life of Miroslav Lajčák slightly less difficult. I just read his announcement after the recent meeting, this was like a week ago or so, right? Where he said, we have a long, long road ahead. I think there are things that you could do, maybe not you as a person, as the head of state, but that Kosovo could do to demonstrate that you are committed to overcoming the current stalemate with Serbia. Again, my fundamental belief is you are the smaller and disadvantaged adversary in this Serbia-Kosovo negotiating effort, and that is why you will benefit. You will always benefit if you are seen by the European Union, by the international community, by our friends in Washington, D.C., as the ones who come up with creative ideas. And finally, last remark. I understand personally your concerns and your explanations about the 2013-2015 problem. But obviously what you're saying, Madam President, is that somebody made a mistake by signing this piece of paper. Okay, that happens in life. We've made many mistakes in the German government, which I find regrettable. That happens in diplomacy. But it is very important, in my view, that if you are certain that you cannot and you will not and you don't want to implement this particular arrangement, try to come up with a creative alternative. You mentioned it yourself, some kind of more informal arrangement, maybe some informal way of supporting the Serb communities to make them feel slightly less unhappy, a little more happy. Maybe there are NGO type of arrangements that could take you a long way, at least as seen by our civil society, by our negotiating people in the EU Commission, et cetera, et cetera. Foreign policy is always also a little bit about perceptions, not only about the hard facts. It's also about perceptions. And you will benefit, I'm absolutely certain, if the perception exists that the President of Kosovo, that the government of Kosovo, Prime Minister Kurti and his government are actually seriously interested and thinking about creative ideas to overcome the deadlock. Voila.
Before I open up, because we've been running on for open up the floor for discussion, we've been already discussing here in the panel for 1 hour. Short reply, please. There is, of course, this is a time when there are elections in Germany, there are elections in France. You might have a 1 year time frame in which you can try to achieve something, and you have brought new issues like missing persons and working group on that. Where do you want to be in the dialogue with Serbia in 1 year?
What we want and what in reality can be achieved are often two different things. What we want is primarily to resolve the issue of the missing persons because that is extremely urgent. It has been urgent for the past 22 years. And for me, it's not a political issue at all. It's humanitarian at its core. But at the same time, to move towards the final agreement, which is centered on mutual recognition. Listening to Vucic's latest statements, who said that he will never recognize Kosovo, I quote, never. I can say that I'm very optimistic about that, but nevertheless, we are very much committed to not just participating in the dialogue, but to go back what Ambassador Ischinger said. In fact, that's exactly what we have been doing, Mr. Ambassador, in every single meeting, both at experts level as well as prime minister's level. Kosovo has been pushing forward exact, concrete proposals. So far, we have not received any from Serbia, both when it comes to minority rights and how they can organize within Kosovo. There was a concrete proposal on that. There was a concrete proposal on missing persons, and there was a concrete proposal on a peace declaration so that at least both parties can commit to peace, which is at the core of every process and a fundamental precondition if we want to move forward. 2 other concrete proposals, let me be more exact, 11 concrete proposals when it comes to our trade relations, which were very much welcomed from every capital, from EU to Washington, D.C. So far, everything was rejected by Serbia. We haven't seen any rejection from the European Union on any of our proposals, and they wanted to put them on the table so that we can discuss them further. However, Serbia did not want to do that. So it's not like we're just sitting idle and waiting for someone else to find solutions to even those bad deals that were reached. We're, in fact, trying to be creative, getting the advice of our partners, of course, in this regard. But when you say bringing forward issues of the past, I don't think a misunderstanding should be created there. Trying to resolve the fate of the missing persons is healing one of the deepest wounds in our region. It's not bringing back issues of the past. And finally, dealing with the past in terms of putting perpetrators before justice, dealing with the past as a notion, everywhere in the world is a precondition for peace, sustainable peace, which is why we're discussing with Serbia on how those who perpetrators those crimes can be brought before justice. We don't see the willingness, but that doesn't mean that we should not continue to work in this front. We have not been stalling the dialogue with Serbia. It's simply not the truth. We have not been backsliding what we said in the parliament and what we promised in the election campaign. We are doing exactly what we promised, not just in this campaign, in our entire political career. We're not blocking the dialogue. We're going forward with concrete proposals. It is Serbia that is rejecting. And I know that in diplomacy, hearing the word unfair means nothing, but it's really unfair. It's absolutely unfair. And it shows bias if Kosovo, the constructive party in all senses in this process, is now being accused for stalling. But I think what we should do a better job on is really talking more to our partners about what is happening in Brussels so that they can get the correct information as well as, instead of misinformation about what happened inside the meetings and what is happening from now on. So Mr. Lajčák knows very well if he's portraying a different picture from what the truth is, then I don't know what to say. But in fact, what is happening there is concrete proposals from minority rights to issues of peace and missing persons. There was only one party coming up with creative, concrete proposals in Brussels, and that has always been Kosovo, at least in these past couple of months.
Very good. Let's hear questions from the audience. I take 2 from the room, and I will read out 2 from the chat. Let's start with you. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. My name is Ricarda Lindau. I work here at DGAP, but I'm also active in other organizations for youth and foreign affairs. So thank you very much so far. President Osmani, considering your own impressive path into your office, how would you encourage other young people in the region, especially women, to start a career in politics, not only in your country, but maybe especially also in Serbia, to bring a new generational perspective into the dialogue?
We collect more questions. On the left-hand side, please introduce yourself.
I'm a journalist from Spiegel. Madam President, I have two questions for you. One, you mentioned the term stabilocracy. Angela Merkel was in Belgrade and is in Tirana now, and the two countries included in the Western Balkan or Berlin process, where the situation of rule of law and democracy has become worse in the last years. So how do you comment on German diplomacy's support especially for Serbia and for stabilocrats? And second question, the Kosovo leadership and also the public in Kosovo strongly opposes the Kosovo Tribunal for the KLA crimes. Don't you think it would put you in a more favorable situation also in relation with Serbia if you were more outspoken on crimes KLA committed during the war?
And let me tie it, thank you, Kenna. Let me tie your questions with two of the ones posted in the chat. One is, what are expectations in Kosovo from the incoming German government after the federal elections? And how is the trial before the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, where former President Taci, but also former Speaker of the Parliament, Kadri Veselin, and others are being indicted? How is it perceived in Kosovo by the population and by the new leadership? So let's start maybe with the first question, role of the woman.
It would take a long answer, but look, I think the most important thing is to not be afraid. There will be so many cases in your political career as a woman in the Western Balkans, where people will try through fear to get you out of what you believe is the right thing to do for your country. It's not the kind of challenges that women in politics would face here in Germany or in other developed countries. It can be much more nastier if you're doing politics in the Western Balkans. So do not fear is my best advice, because what you're fighting for is absolutely worth it. And what is important is, in my case, if you look at the result of the elections, you can see that the society has emancipated much quicker than political parties. So even if political parties have been trying to stop women from thriving, from pushing forward important agendas for the country, the people of Kosovo disagreed with some of those parties and gave a woman, in this case, I had the honor, the highest number of votes in the history of Kosovo, the highest support in the history of the country. And this has shown that when you don't give up in front of these obstacles and you truly fight for democracy, for equality, and a more just and equitable future for your people, ultimately it will be them that will push you forward, no matter what the party says. Of course, in this path, we need men champions who understand that without unleashing and employing the potential of 50% of the population, which is the women, you can never succeed. You can never have a healthy society. And my advice to political parties some time ago on an NDI roundtable was, you can never win without the women. They can't. They're going to continue to lose. 62% of our voters in our anti-corruption platform were women. It was women who made the change possible and who gave our institutions the overwhelming support that they had. So political parties need to learn from this example, not just give the women a seat at the table, but make sure that their voice is heard. Because it's not just about having them there. It's about really including them on decision-making, on the highest points of the agenda. Not have women around the table and then have 3 men say, okay, we need some 5 minutes out, and then they come back after 5 minutes and they would tell all of us what all 3 men have decided on behalf of all of us. I've seen this happening for the past 22 years of my political career. So, I mean, it's a very challenging and bumpy road, but whenever we as women face these, we have to think about all the little girls that are watching. We need to make sure that for their sake and the sake of our society, we remove the stones from the road so that they don't have to feel and go through what we went through.
So, Ambassador Ischinger wants to...
Can I just please offer a footnote to this? Because I think this is important, and I can say it more easily than you can say it. Actually, this young nation of Kosovo has already had, or has the second female president now. In this brief history of Kosovo since independence, in 2008, 2 female presidents have been elected. We are having a little bit of a debate in Germany why we have never had a female president so far. So maybe we can learn a little bit from Kosovo. That's all I wanted to say.
You did have a woman chancellor who has served as quite a great model for so many countries.
And the second question was exactly on the final farewell visit of Angela Merkel in Belgrade and Tirana and the results of the Berlin process that she initiated in terms of rule of law and specifically towards Serbia and German relations with Vučić Serbia, I guess.
If there's one country in the Western Balkans that is absolutely not democratic and is going through more autocratic measures, not respecting freedom of media, not respecting freedom of speech, where you can barely find an opposition, that is Serbia. But I think the bigger problem of Serbia is something else when it comes to the leadership of Serbia. It's the fact that they don't want to break away from the Milosevic past. That is the bigger problem. Vučić was a minister of Milosevic, the minister of propaganda, not to say the least, of Milosevic. Dačić was the interior minister of Milosevic. Vulin was also a minister of Milosevic. The top 3 people who are pushing forward the great Serbian dream, the so-called, are all ministers of Milosevic. In internal meetings when we have on regional fora, I'm always very careful on the words that I use on the crimes that have been committed in former Yugoslavia. I say the crimes of the Milosevic regime. Vučić has never taken the opportunity to break away from that past. Quite the opposite. In all of these internal meetings, they continue to glorify Milosevic, to protect what he did. And I think that is the biggest problem of Serbia, coupled with the fact that they're killing every democratic standard that is also required for European Union integration, and one of the biggest reasons why they haven't been able to open new chapters in the EU integration path. Now,
but the question was about the role of Germany and the legacy of Angela Merkel in Berlin process, what has been achieved?
Back in 2011-12 and also 2013, I was present in all of the meetings when the late advisor of Angela Merkel, Mr. Schockenhoff, was coming to Kosovo, then going to Belgrade, and came forward with a number of points where Germany was so clear on what it requires Serbia to do if it wants to push forward its EU integration path. Recognition of Kosovo was very clearly put out in those points. Germany was the very first country in the European Union to be so clear towards Serbia. They wouldn't use the words normalization and all of these vague terms. Germany was the only country, in fact, to say, recognize Kosovo if you want to push forward the European Union agenda. And I think this has been confirmed through some statements of Angela Merkel in her latest visit to Serbia and later on to Albania. I do hope that whoever is the new chancellor of Germany, and I'm extremely pleased from my meeting with President Steinmeier yesterday as well, that the new government in Germany, no matter who the new chancellor will be, will continue that same commitment towards Kosovo. But we will work with the new government to make sure that there are even clearer messages in the future when it comes to Serbia's recognition of Kosovo. Because if we backslide from that clear message, Serbia is going to keep hostage the entire region for the next decades to come, not just in the years to come.
And expectations from the future German federal government as Kosovo beyond the integration to international community organizations in terms of investment, economy?
Yes. In terms of investments and economy, the German businesses and investors have no reason to look at Kosovo as an, let's say, unstable politically or otherwise region any longer. We have very stable institutions, extremely successful in our rule of law efforts, extremely successful in amending legislation when it comes to protecting foreign investors, youngest population in Europe, the cheapest labor, the fourth country in the world with the highest concentration of German speakers, and of course a youth that is absolutely educated, tech savvy, and speaks foreign languages. We have the best conditions right now offered to foreign investors, and we're working closely with the government, and we will with the next government as well, to make sure that we increase the investment of Germany in Kosovo. In the past 6 months, Kosovo, from all the Western Balkan countries, had the highest trade exchange with Germany, and there's a 95% increase in this exchange compared to the previous year. But we still can open so many new chapters, especially when it comes to medium-sized and bigger companies who would want to invest in Kosovo. I think it's the ideal destination for this investment.
And finally, on Kosovo Specialist Chamber, there were two questions.
On the specialist chambers, look, for a country, there can be no bigger commitment to justice than what Kosovo did. All of the leaders that are now facing justice at The Hague have voluntarily cooperated with this institution. We didn't do what Serbia did, to have people at large for years, and then, even after they are found guilty by the ICTY, have them get important jobs in the military and give them military honors. We don't do that. What we are doing is absolute cooperation with international justice, in this case, the specialist chambers. And I think the fact that every single leader of Kosovo that was invited by these chambers has voluntarily went there and has shown their willingness to cooperate shows that, one, we have nothing to hide. Two, the important factor here is to point out that the specialist chambers were formed with an overwhelming majority in the parliament. The parliament represents the people of Kosovo. If you have an overwhelming majority voting in favor over 2/3, that means that we have given all the support that these tribunals need in order to have fair and free judgment in according to the law that they apply. And I think it is extremely important that, especially as a lawyer that has taught issues of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes for so long, both in Kosovo and the United States, that I point out that while the trial is ongoing, I cannot accept for anyone to say the crimes that were committed. These are alleged crimes. There are trials ongoing. We as Kosovo have given all the support necessary to these chambers. There is absolutely no political intrusion into what they are doing, no political statements from any of the institutions in Kosovo against the chambers. Quite the opposite. Our Minister of Justice met with the chambers a few days ago to discuss how all of this cooperation is going, and at the same time, of course, it is important that human rights standards are respected also when it comes to the indicted in this case. So as a country, there's nothing else that we can do. We've done everything from support to the parliament, to political statements in support of the work, to the fact that we never attacked the court, and neither will we attack their decisions. Let me be very clear now, going back, not as a lawyer, but as a politician. It is absolutely unacceptable for us as Kosovo institutions, but primarily as the people of Kosovo that went through hell during the Milosevic regime, to see the tendencies to rewrite history. There can never be a moral equivalence between what the Milosevic state-sponsored regime committed in Kosovo and what might have been individual acts that were not state-sponsored, not supported by the people of Kosovo, nor the institutions of Kosovo. There can never be a moral equivalency. the history is clear because it happened in front of all of your eyes. Milosevic and Milosevic Serbia were the aggressors. We were the victims. No one can change that history.
We have less than 15 minutes left. Let's take one more round of questions, starting here.
I wonder if this is working. It is. Hello, everyone. My name is Maida Ruge, and I am with the European Council on Foreign Relations here in Berlin. Just to point out, I think it's quite symbolic we're having this discussion on the September 15th. For those who do not know, today is the so-called national holiday of Serb unity, which Republika Srpska and Belgrade jointly proclaimed last year. And so I wanted to kind of, add a footnote, as you said, Ambassador Ischinger, to maybe your statement on how important it is from the tactical point of view for Kosovo not to appear as blocking. But on the other hand, to have us just zoom out a little bit from just the matter of Kosovo and think how strategically important it is for Germany and Europe to acknowledge the wider trends in the region, which have grown lately with Serbia's very robust and not very constructive meddling in the internal affairs of Bosnia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. And the irony here is that Kosovo, though not being independent in the view of Serbia, is the most independent out of the three countries in its domestic affairs. Just to give you, skipping from Miroslav Lajčák to Mr. Christian Schmidt, who has just arrived to Bosnia in August. He has landed on a countrywide boycott or boycott by all Serb parties of the central government institutions. There hasn't been a single session since July held at the central government. The presidency hasn't met to approve the lifting of a helicopter to extinguish a fire that was raging in Bosnia because Milorad Dodik boycotted it. And meanwhile, President Vučić is holding a military exercise in Serbia with Milorad Dodik on his side, and you would think, it's aired on national TV, you would actually think Milorad Dodik is the Minister of Defense of Serbia, because there's no mention to Bosnia. In Montenegro, we've just had huge protests in Cetinje that are exemplifying, this notion of Serbian meddling through two-pronged approach. And I think, and then we have Chancellor Merkel standing next to President Vučić 2 days ago, giving him, big praise about being the factor of stability and someone very, who you can trust. So my question is, how do we move away from this strategical mistake that we're, I think, repeating from the 90s and actually identify that there is a wider problem here? And especially as Germany, that really has big stakes in also making Bosnia work now.
We have to be careful not to eat up all time left by questions. So if there is one more, but within a very short one, within a minute, please.
I also want to flip the questions. Yes, my name is Angelusha Morina, and I'm colleague of Maida. I'm also speaking on behalf of, I work for European Council on Foreign Relations. So my question is, I want to flip it a little bit, because I do agree with Ambassador Ischinger that Kosovo has been an unequal party in the whole EU integration, Serbia dialogue, so on and so forth. And, to be fair to Kosovo, there has been a lot of demands, like Kosovo special chambers is one of them, and there are a lot of extra demands on visa liberalization. But Europe has failed to deliver on many fronts when it comes to the relationship with Kosovo. And we heard that Kosovo cannot exist on its own. It has to be very tightly related to its Euro-Atlantic path. So what would it take, Ambassador Ischinger, for Europe to be unified when it comes to Kosovo, to have the 5 non-recognizers come on board, and to, after all these demands, to now grant something for Kosovo? And also, what would it take to let Kosovo come up with creative proposals for Serb community in Kosovo and not have Serbia interfere all the time? Because I think no matter what Kosovo can propose, there would be interference from Serbia on all these proposals. Thanks, Milan.
Ambassador Ischinger, there were questions for you, and there is one in the chat related to visa liberalization. What should member states and Brussels now deliver on the stalled issue of visa liberalization of Kosovo?
Well, first of all, on this one, I find it I speak not on behalf of anyone, I speak on my own behalf. I find it personally, as someone who's been engaged in the past in regional issues, I find it totally, absolutely unacceptable that Kosovo has not yet enjoyed visa liberalization. Full stop. This is just a nightmare.
Because everybody else in the Balkans has it.
Right. Everybody has it. And I could give you a list of countries that also enjoy it, whom I would trust much less than I would trust, you know, the leaders of Kosovo. I don't want to publicly announce my list, but everybody knows which countries enjoy a free access to Germany and to the Schengen region without visa. Point one. Point two, I have no answer, because this has now existed for 12 years, 13 years, to the question of how we overcome the fact that the European Union has not, cannot, and will not in the near future have one uniform position on recognition of Kosovo. We have these 5 member countries that still find it for their various different reasons. But I have a proposition in principle, which I have written about, which I've talked about, namely that the European Union, if it wants to be taken seriously, not only by Kosovo, but by everybody else around the world, as a foreign policy actor, the European Union needs to take the historic step of moving in that direction of qualified majority voting in foreign policy decisions. And if the recognition of a country is regarded as a foreign policy question, and if you have qualified majority voting, the problem of Kosovo as a country to be recognized would not be on the agenda in 2021. Voila, full stop.
As you know, this is still a national prerogative for all member states, and they will not give it away, starting with Germany and France, probably. We have 3 minutes left, and 5 minutes, actually. Thank you. So there were questions along the same lines. From this part, and please let's leave 1 minute at the end for a special question on something we haven't discussed yet that I have on
perhaps not to answer, just to agree with everything that you said. I absolutely agree. It's about time that the European Union especially looks at the bigger picture of Serbia's role in the region in the entirety, and not try to focus on the tiny details of who acts how in a round of negotiations, because to truly understand the role of a country, you need to look at the bigger picture, especially when it comes to the military exercises that we mentioned, the meddling into the internal affairs of each and every country. And unfortunately, this is what we see is not new. It is what Serbia has been, what Serbia is. And unfortunately, if it continues to be supported and seen as the pro-European that is not, I think this is what we might see in the future as well. So I do hope that beyond the issue of the dialogue, which is just one issue, that Serbia's role in the region is seen as what truly is. Serbia is not contributing to stability, full stop. Serbia is not contributing to democracy, because the 15th of September is also the International Day of Democracy. Serbia is not contributing to peace in the region. And you don't need to hear me say that. Every single regional leader that I meet, the presidents of the region, their biggest concern is Serbia. No matter if we're talking about Montenegro or if we're talking about other leaders around, they've tried to destabilize Croatia. They have problems. They had problems with Macedonia sometimes. They are trying to destabilize Montenegro, and Montenegro is right now undergoing probably the biggest crisis in the past 20, 30 years. The same with Bosnia, an ongoing crisis, and this takes me back to what I was trying to explain at the beginning. This is exactly what we're trying to avoid in Kosovo, exactly what we're trying to avoid, to become another country where every single day you have a Dodik that blocks every decision that is in the interest of the citizens that he represents.
In the 1 minute left, we haven't even mentioned China. Geopolitics is back. In Bosnia, China surprised many recently in joining Russia in joint declaration at the UN Security Council. Do you feel China engaged in Pristina?
No, and that is because of the strategic decision that we have made, not just this government, but every government before that, to make sure that our cooperation, whether it's economic or political and otherwise, is towards the West. In terms of the European Union, the United States, and other allies that have been supporting us, there has been no economic project or activity together with China, which is the reason why we are so much better off nowadays compared to some other countries in the region that took loans. There has never been a Chinese loan taken from the Kosovo institutions, and we have reaffirmed this strategic orientation also now during the pandemic, where, as I said, we have not received or accepted any Chinese or Russian vaccines. The only in the region, if I may add.
Final 1 minute remark from Ambassador Ischinger.
A very brief point I forgot to mention. Let's not let's be clear that we know how to distinguish between announcements made, for example, by the German Chancellor on the podium with President Vučić, and what she has said, probably has said, communicated to President Vučić behind closed doors. This is not identical. And President Vučić knows, I know that he knows, that his country will not be a member of the European Union so long as it has not cleared up the Kosovo issue, recognized Kosovo. He knows that very well. But it's sometimes part of your diplomatic effort to offer public praise and to embrace a country because you expect that country behind closed doors then to do more. That's part of the art of diplomacy. So, you know, the nice public appearance should not confuse us about the toughness of the message which President Vučić and the Serbian government needs to hear again and again from the European Union and certainly from the German government. And I'm quite hopeful that the next German government will echo that pretty clear and unequivocal message.
Madam President, thank you very much to find, we are going extra over time. Thank you very much.
I wanted to agree with the ambassador said, having been in so many of these meetings, we should really distinguish between what happens inside and the messages that are given publicly. Thank you, Ambassador.
Madam President, once again, thank you for finding time during your visit to Berlin for DGAP. We wish you a successful visit. And we'll stay tuned with us for more discussions on the Balkan issues. Ambassador Ischinger, thank you for coming again on the poll. Thank you to all of you in the room and online, and apologies for going extra time. Have a good day.